Okay, Sajid, we can start.
That's it.
The old password from before Ramadan, I haven't changed it. Once we log in. Let me know when I can start. We're live?
Yeah. Wait.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's been a while since we've seen everyone in person. Welcome to the Azure Qatar community. My name is Fatma. I am one of the leads of Azure Qatar community, and I have some of my colleagues here in the room as well. I see a couple of new faces in the audience. So just for those of you who don't know us, I'm not sure how you guys came across us. I hope we've been asking some people to do some marketing for us. So I hope it helped a little bit. So we are a team of people who love technology. Most of us are Microsoft employees, but this is not like a Microsoft official platform. We do not represent the company, even though we are in the company and we are employees, but this is a fully community platform for the community, and everyone is welcome to participate. And we even had some community members present last time as well. And we talk about everything about the cloud. So whether that's AI, we had a lot of AI stuff, data, and now we're having security because we received a lot of questions about security, and we wanted to do a whole series about security with our great hero here that we're going to introduce in a second. So we're calling it Guardians of the Cloud. I know it's like a Copilot generated poster, but it's really true. So throughout the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about how do you protect your infrastructure, your data, all of your cloud estate. And specifically, we're going to look at how to use Microsoft tools to do that. So we have Peter with us here today. And he's going to be with us for the next 3 weeks as well. We're going to go all the way from the basics until the advanced. So today's episode, we're calling it the Watchtower, right? So before you actually start going hunting and everything, you need to know what's in the vicinity. You need to watch and observe and understand what's coming in, what's going out. And Peter is going to tell us more about what is Microsoft Sentinel, how you can get started with security logging and so on. Peter has extensive experience in this field. How long? Probably longer than I've been around. 20, yeah, that is a long time. And he recently joined us. He was at Palo Alto, which is also a great cybersecurity company as well. And now he's at Microsoft, and he's been working with a lot of big government customers, and a lot of. He just told me that he worked with WWE as well to work to protect their security. Who knew that you need to protect WrestleMania? So, Peter, I'll give it over to you. And for those of you who are new, we like to keep our sessions very interactive, right? Like this is not college where you just like sit back and then just go and leave. We want you to actually benefit from this session. So please ask questions. This is a safe space. If you don't know what Peter's saying, like raise your hand and say, could you like explain what you mean about what you're referring to? And also, towards the end of the session, Peter's going to ask you questions, and you get to walk away with some cool Microsoft merch. I don't know what we have today. Did we check? I hope we upgraded from wireless charger. I think people are sick of that. But maybe we have like something cooler. So be attentive. And ask questions. Engage. Take pictures. Take pictures and post about us on LinkedIn. We have a community on LinkedIn. And for those of you who are not on the community on LinkedIn, reach out to us later. Reach out to us later, and we'll help you.
All right.
Over to Peter.
Thank you. So,
Over to you.
welcome everybody. Just before we start, I would like to understand a little bit the audience itself. So please raise your hand if you've been working in cybersecurity. Right. Raise your hand if you are freshly graduated and you're working or interning in a company. What area of interest is it? IT or computer science, IT help desk, okay? Alrighty. And anybody of you focusing on AI, data science or entering your studies? Great. You guys will have, next week's session will be much more interesting. Today we'll talk primarily around basics. We'll talk about how to architect things, how to architect things. Costs don't go out of hand. Costs don't go out of your infrastructure is able to cope with changes and many cope with changes. And we will talk about basics, like how to collect data, how to collect data, what makes sense to collect, what makes sense to collect. Hopefully this makes sense. And hopefully this makes sense. Feel free as we go through the presentation. I'm an introvert, so I'm shy by default, so very awkward. I encourage you as well. Stand up, ask questions. Feel free to stand up, ask questions. I am a little bit unclear or anything else. Everything okay? Everything okay? Great. Just briefly about me, so that you understand. So 21 years in the software programming, primarily on the security side. So I participated a lot in kernel drivers and many other different vendors. And recently I switched to Microsoft. Prior to joining Microsoft, I did security. Basically, we designed this. Sorry. You can use it. So sorry. Basically, I designed the security operations center to protect FIFA, and I used to specialize a lot in large sporting events. Fatima clearly said I participated in WWE, NFL, and many other sporting events worldwide.
The NFL as well.
Correct.
The NFL as well.
Correct. Super Bowl, particularly. All right. So our agenda for today is. And I do apologize in advance. My laptop failed. Actually, my laptop 2 hours before the presentation. I had to rebuild from scratch.
Right before a big presentation.
Yeah, it's okay. It's actually my own fault. So what we'll talk about is what Sentinel is. We'll talk about how do we deploy. We'll talk about how do we deploy, what type of data we collect, how do we connect data, and a little bit of a starter collection plan. On top of that, as we announced in the announcement.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about how actually Sentinel and Microsoft are helping organizations in Qatar to meet the Qatar 2022 cybersecurity framework requirements, including the use cases for security monitoring. Hopefully the agenda is clear. Feel free to interrupt as we go through. All right. So basically, Sentinel is a log collector that's placed in the cloud that collects data. So that data can be security data, security data from your firewalls, from your endpoints, from many other data sources. Basically, you can collect any data within your Azure environment, but in your Azure environment, but we also do work with other to ingest data natively. And you can ingest data from your on-premises environment, servers on-prem, servers on-prem, your rack in your server room can be connected to the platform itself. Its primary function is to collect data. Once we start collecting data, we then focus on three other aspects. And those aspects are detect, investigate, and respond. So what do we talk about? What do we detect? What does it actually mean? Do you have any idea? I'm going to ask my colleague here, Abdul. Please. So what do we mean by detect?
Suspicious pattern beside the logs that are being ingested.
Okay. All right. And based on what do we make these decisions? Detection rules that we craft. What do we need for those detection rules to work? We need logs. Exactly. So again, when we talk about investigate, what do you consider here? Can somebody answer? All right.
Deep dive analysis based on the investigation is going deep dive analysis, based on the logs or based on the anomaly, history of the events.
Great. We investigate based on anomalies. These anomalies can be coming from our detection rules, as one of our colleagues clearly mentioned. It can also come from your hunting rules. So basically, you have a hypothesis and you go through the data that we are collecting, right? Exactly. And finally, we do have something which is called respond. So what do we mean by this? Can anybody help out? Alrighty. Here.
So based on our investigations, then we can do some playbooks, rules that we can respond to these, respond to the outcomes of our investigation.
So ideally is you respond to something to investigate or something that we detected. So effectively saying Sentinel is a security platform that will help you collect your information, make relevant detection to discover intrusions or anomalies. It allows you to investigate, hunt across this data, and it allows you to automatically respond using predefined playbooks, or you can respond manually to a security incident. Great. So all of this is built upon a couple of Azure native components. One of them is Azure Log Analytics. Second one is Query Language, which is part of Data Explorer and other components. And we talk about Logic Apps, which is basically our automation process, right? Ideally, Sentinel is priced on per gigabyte and based on the retention, which means that the data choices we make to onboard will drive our consumption and cost.
Here,
Sure.
So is Sentinel just is my voice loud enough? Okay, I'll use the mic. Okay. Is Sentinel essentially based on what you just mentioned, just like a place where all of my logs go? It's just like a storage. That's all.
Not necessarily. So the log analytics part, or more recently the data lake part that we'll talk about, is the place where the logs are being stored. But Sentinel is more like a platform where all of these components and items come together. We'll talk about it actually in one of the next slides. We'll see all the relevant components of Sentinel which are related to detecting and performing some internal AI and ML stuff on top of data, right? So we will definitely cover that in the coming slides. So ideally, when you do work in, for example, Azure environment, so your entire ecosystem is Azure. Sentinel comes with predefined items for detection for anomalies, for many other things that are built for that particular environment. So natively, we are able to ingest a lot of data that is produced primarily within the Azure ecosystem. And all of that basically allows you to detect incidents significantly faster natively within the Microsoft ecosystem, but also any third parties that are collecting data or sending data to Sentinel as well.
They're on top of my log data to make it easier to sift through all my logs.
So in one way, it allows you to basically sift through your logs, but it's not its primary purpose. So again, when we talk about logs, we talk security, IT logs, operational logs. We tend not to collect data that is not meaningful for security detection. So ideally, the way you should think about Sentinel is a repository for your security-related data on top which you basically run detection rules, you run your hunting queries, you run meaningful things that actually bring malicious behavior or discover malicious behavior in your environment, right? So it's not just purely a log collector. I actually talk about it two slides down the line. Great. Any further questions?
Guys, don't try to ask questions.
Alrighty. So as we asked the Sentinel layer, we have the SIM, which basically gathers security data. We have the SOAR layer. So SOAR is basically the security orchestration, automation, and response layer, which we talked about playbooks and many other things. So all of that allows you to basically analyze the data that is stored here in the storage part, which is analytical and lake storage. And we'll talk about particularly why is it important to store data in the analytical tier and why it is important to use the lake tier as well. And all of that is deployed in your Azure subscription, so you need to take care of identity of your role-based access control, billing scope region where this instance is deployed, and many other things. So key things that you need to take away before and understand before you create a Sentinel instance. You need to understand where you're going to deploy it, who's going to access it, what is my layer of integration with other components. Are we going to expose this instance publicly, or this is going to be a private instance? Are we going to allow access to a third party to manage our solution, right? So all of these items factor in, and we will talk about all of that throughout our presentation. So the first thing is, are we going to deploy one workspace or many workspaces? Are we going to manage a single workspace, or are we going to manage multiple smaller workspaces? This is the first question you need to ask yourself, right? And this matters a lot. So it has a key, you need to consider one key aspect. If you're focused on a single workspace, that means all of your data from all of your devices will come in one particular repository. So when you grant access to any of your security teams, they will have access to that particular repository itself, which they will be able to see everything. Right, and you may, for example, for compliance reasons, if you work for a company that is working on two different continents or two different regions, you have different compliance requirements. And one might be that if you have an instance in Qatar, it can be only accessed by people residing in Qatar, for example, right? This would be your legal requirement. So when you design your workspace, the data will be stored in Qatar for compliance reasons and for contractual reasons, right? Then you might deploy, for example, in UK, if you have a branch office in UK and you want to collect logs there, right? Then you might have maybe a specific requirement that the data has to be within the borders of UK. So you might consider a multi-workspace environment. This is one architectural decision, right? Another one might be if you work for a company that is basically like a managed service provider. So you might connect to different workspaces, then you might opt in to work in an MSSP model where you have, again, multiple tenants, multiple workspaces. Does it make sense so far? Any questions here? Sure.
Here we are comparing one platform or one dashboard for multiple regions, or no, decentralized means two different dashboards with two Sentinel copies.
So basically, you will have two separate Sentinel instances, which means they will be completely independent of one another. One will not know about the other instance. And there is a way that basically you connect like a viewing glass and management glass on top of that, right? So ideally, when you have a multi-tenant scenario, you have a central management where all of your events will be seen. So you might have, for example, again, we're talking, you have your Qatar data center and your data stays within Qatar for compliance reasons, for regulatory reasons, right? And you might have the same requirement somewhere else within European Union. So now when you have two separate instances, the data will be only visible to that particular tenant. You as a, for example, security operations team, might need to deploy something what we call Azure Lighthouse or multi-tenant option within the Microsoft Defender ecosystem. And you'll be able to see data from multiple tenants as a particular global SOC, right? Does it make sense? All right. Can you please pass the microphone there? All right.
What is the limit for workspaces within one tenant? Can I have multiple workspaces?
Sure.
And the workspaces will not learn about each other. So let's say I have an app function that I need to collect logs from, and I want to create another workspace for another app function within the same tenant. Can these two workspaces not to know about each other?
Correct. So basically, consider one particular workspace as a boundary for your data and even who gets to authenticate. As we said, it follows RBAC principles from Azure itself, right? So you get to basically control what gets to send data to your instance or read data, right? So effectively, you have that logical separation within the Azure environment, even if it's one subscription, right? Or let's say one tenant, you can deploy multiple workspaces and then you can deploy the Sentinel solution on top of it. Any further questions? No? All right. Again, couple of things to watch out. You do have egress charges, right? So effectively, if you replicate data from one region to another, you might run into some additional networking charges, which is typical in any cloud environment. One thing is that I want to highlight is that when you run cross workspace queries, you basically, if you write an inefficient query, you'll be querying across all of your workspaces at the same time, which might consume a lot of resources, right? All right. Again, I did mention data lake. So basically, data lake is a cheaper way for us to basically store data that is needed for your organization, right? So what does that mean? Previously, we had something called only analytical tier, where the data is coming at a much higher rate. It's being used for threat detection actively, right? So let me see if this is working. So on the left side here, we have the analytic tier, which means that full Sentinel functionality is available for that particular tier or that particular workspace, which means all of your detections will work. All of your queries will work, workbooks, interactive queries, summary rules, and everything else. Again, it's built on log analytics, runs KQL, logic apps. And we did say that the pricing model is price per gigabyte, and data choices will drive the cost of that particular tier. Now, when we talk about data lake, what is the primary purpose for us to implement data lake? We do understand that a lot of organizations actually have compliance needs just to store data, not analyze it every single time. So the analytical tier is something what we will analyze on ingestion. We will run detection rules, we'll run many other things. The data lake part is something where we'll store data for a longer period of time for an archiving purpose, for example. So you might have a regulation in Qatar that banks need to store data for 10 years. You will not store that in an analytical tier. It's too expensive. You will go for something that's made for that. Also, this allows you to run queries on top of it. So basically, you can build custom machine learning models and do advanced analytics of that particular data. So build statistical models and many other things, which we'll talk about actually next week. And we will look into that particular case. But how it works. So we have KQL jobs, which is basically like a scheduled job that you will write a query. It will go fetch the data you need. It will put that data in a temporary table, or it will just present you that data. And the performance is significantly slower than the analytical tier. Hopefully that makes sense. Any questions here? Yes, sure.
So in the pricing, you're saying it's per GB ingested plus the retention. So the retention is like the period of time that the GBs will stay on that storage. In the hot tier. Okay. So you can determine that, the period? I mean, like the retention time? Yeah.
I can actually show you that a little bit later, but per table, we are able to define how much data sits in that particular workspace, right? So by default, we give you 90 days of storing, which means all of our analytical rules in the backend that run on the platform itself, they have a 90-day look back for specific type of data, right? So when we talk about building a baseline for some specific activities in your environment, in your logs, we baseline with 90 days back.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, of course. And for the data lake, that means like after the 90 days or after the data is not in use that much, then we move it to the, I mean, from the analytical tier to the data lake after there is no more use. Is that the case?
Correct. So based on your retention policies in the table, we'll talk about, I can actually show you later on, but the data will go from analytics tier automatically mirrored into the data lake tier.
All right, thank you.
So then again, data lake tier, low cost, long-term retention is one of the use case, right? We will talk about many different use cases later on where data lake is very useful, right? So let's assume that you want to ingest security data, for example, from your network detection and response appliance. that appliance will give you alerts by default by its own internal engine, right? So you can integrate the appliance with the environment. But then you don't want a lot of data coming into your analytical tier. You can put it in the data lake tier. And you can create custom rules later on that will fire once a day or once a week to run some advanced analytics or hunt back with specific IOCs, right? Hopefully it makes sense. All right, thank you. Sure.
Is going to be a direct competition of Dynatrace, Datadog type of tools? Is this going to be the direct competition for Dynatrace, Datadog type of tools?
I don't think so. This is a competition for that. Again, we are primarily a security solution, right? So we ingest security data. We don't ingest operational data, right?
But those tools like Dynatrace, that is providing each and every type of details from even error tracing in any of the technology, plus security alerts, plus server data, plus cloud data, everything is given by them in one place.
Correct.
So I'm just trying to figure out how it is different from them.
So ideally, right, we say to separate operational data such as IT data or cloud, let's say telemetry on the performance of your systems into a different tier that is not security related, right? So we do have the Azure Monitor that basically collects these this type of operational data. So we tend to stay out of monitoring on the IT aspect, right? On security aspect, I don't think we are competing. We do have a solution, right? So it's a security solution that collects security data. It fires based on custom rules or analytical rules that are defined in the system.
So what about the user presentation? Once data is collected by Sentinel, after that, is there any common user presentation for the end user for that data? Otherwise, going to the tables, querying them, finding the things will become a little difficult task.
Not necessarily, right? So the marketplace by itself, the Azure Sentinel marketplace, offers you a lot of content, right? So we do have something what we call workbooks. So workbooks are a graphical representation of your data. So basically the queries are predefined, it's graphing the necessary data which that content pack presents itself, right? So if you take, for example, a content pack that analyzes your effectiveness of your firewall, right? So it will monitor how many connections there are there, how many rules are firing, how many incidents there are from that particular log source, whether it is Fortinet, Palo Alto, Cisco, you have already pre-built playbooks for that and workbooks.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any further questions? Great. So one particular thing I want to talk about, and I did mention it at the very beginning, is that collecting data does not equal detection, right? Again, we need to analyze what kind of data sources we are onboarding into the environment that are meaningful for your security operations to basically do threat detection, to do investigations, hunting, enrichment. This will help you basically determine where you're going to put a specific type of data. So is it going to go to the analytical tier or it's going to go to the data lake tier? Then you need to design your tenant and the workspace architecture. Again, as we mentioned previously, it's a multi-tenant deployment. Do we have to do multi-tenancy? Is it a regulatory requirement or not? So on and so forth. So as you clearly stated, what we do want to collect primarily are security signals, not everything. We focus primarily on what is actually meaningful for us. What we don't want to collect are performance and operational noise that basically wastes the budget for running a security tier. It basically stores unnecessary data for a security team. So security teams should not know about health probe status and many other things in your environment. All right.
So Peter, what would you say is like, because you mentioned about like data sources, what would you say is like the top 3 most important data sources to onboard when you first get started.
All right. We did cover that. Exactly. So I prepared something what we call a starter day one collection plan. And this is going to help you. So as you can see here, in the first day, you will want to basically onboard your identity logs and auditing logs, sign in and audit primarily, right? It's going to help you basically identify account compromises, user activity, abuse of your user, and so on. We do have Microsoft 365 Defender. Again, it's a native connector. You just activate it, pair it, and that's it. So we do have a lot of things that we do recommend to be onboarded at the very beginning. And then later on, you can work on onboarding additional data sources. But primarily, you want to understand what is happening in the control plane of Azure, right? So your activity logs, what is being executed by your administrator, right? Or by your cloud team. You want to understand who sends email, what kind of emails they're sending. Do you receive phishing emails? Are you spamming your users, so on and so forth? This is where the Defender and Office logs come into play. Make sense? Questions?
Okay. So you know that we need to be GDPR compliant, and you mentioned in one of the couple of slides before that the data retention can go up to 12 years.
Correct.
So does that make us not compliant to the GDPR law?
What do you mean?
Because there is a 13 months of retention by the GDPR law if I'm collecting data specific to end users, including the intra IDs, IP addresses.
Excellent question. So you have a way of basically masking specific data or omitting specific data past a specific time frame, right? So if you don't want to store Entra sign-in logs past your regulatory requirement, you can actually configure it for that particular table. So Entra ID sign-in logs. So when you go to the management blade of Entra specifically, you will configure the export to the log analytic workspace of Sentinel. And there you will define what is your retention timeframe for that particular data. Does it make sense? All right.
What's the issue if I just onboard all of these data sources? Why do I need to like start with a little and then go more?
It's not something that you can start with little and add a little more. So ideally, what is native, you can easily onboard, right? Which is a matter of a couple of clicks. But usually when we talk about organizations, right, like if we talk about the oil and gas sector or the banking sector in the country or anywhere else, they have a very strict change request and change management lifecycle, right? Which means that you need to provide a change management form, and then there is testing and approval process and so on. So this is very, very crucial to plan, but I expect not to onboard this type of logs at the very beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Hopefully it makes sense. All right. Any further questions? Okay, let's go back a little bit, few slides. So we're talking about what data actually should I collect, and we will dive a little bit deeper than just superficially talking about it. Again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we are talking about collecting identity data. So your Entra sign-in logs, your basically everything what's happening within the identity plane itself. We're talking about endpoint security. What processes are running on your endpoint? What network connections your endpoints are making? Basically, everything around your endpoints. Then we talk about network security, your firewall data, your VPN authentication, who is coming to your VPN appliance, from where they're coming. Eventually, you will onboard DNS query logs. And for example, NSG flow logs or NetFlow. Does anybody know what this is here?
It collects data from switches and routers.
Exactly. So it collects raw data from switches, routers, and it's very rich data, right? So for example, why we love it in threat detection is that this data comes in near real time. Why is this important? You will understand who is talking to who and what are the actual bytes transferred between sessions, right? Unlike firewalls, right? So current firewalls are operating at the layer 7 of the OSI layer, right? But they usually log their sessions at session end. Do you understand the difference? All right. So firewalls will basically, if they operate on layer 7, right, they will record in their memory when a traffic is starting by an endpoint. But they will log the actual log once the session is finished. So if you're collecting data from a firewall and the logging is set at session end, you will receive the log at the very end of that particular session. So if I'm exfiltrating tens of gigabytes of data from your environment, you will not know in real time. You will know once that particular session is logged by your firewall. So this is why NetFlow logs are very helpful in identifying this at a very early stage. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Excellent. Then we can focus on getting data from your cloud control plane. It doesn't necessarily have to be Azure or AWS or GCP, Kubernetes. It can be also an on-premise VMware solution as well. It's also a control plane. Email collaboration, so basically your collaboration systems. It's very important to have this type of logs. One is to identify which users might be phished in your environment, who is receiving malicious emails, phishing emails, scam emails, so on and so forth. But it's also very useful to identify other email-related threats, right? We will talk about that in our next week. We will talk one specific use case for email itself. Last but not least, threat intel data, we need to collect it. Any further questions here? Sorry, I'm always going to ask at the end of every slide so that we make it more interactive. Sure.
The most common problem that we face is in the legacy applications. So legacy application which is poorly architected, hackers and attackers are always finding the entry point to the organization. Entry point is either your query string or the file upload feature you given in your application. Okay, if it is not whitelisted, not handled properly in the application, like you can upload anything. Okay, you uploaded a batch file or you are trying to pass some malicious command through the query string. So will that be covered under this network security or any of the category or endpoint security?
Primarily, like this is an architectural question, not a SIM question, but I will answer it, right? So when you do have legacy applications in your environment and you need to secure them, right? You need to ask yourself, A, is my security control going to make sense? Like financially, you might spend like $3 million on buying a solution and ingesting the data from that particular legacy solution, right? Just to make sense of the data. And what is the actual impact if a threat actually exploits a vulnerability, right? So you need to understand first, do we need to protect it? But then when we do talk about detecting this type of things, so if it's a web application, right? So you probably have a web application firewall. So the web application firewalls will log the requests. So it is built basically to detect this type of malicious injections and like SQL injections or cross-site scripting attacks within your application itself. Now, when it comes to uploading a malicious binary and executing it, or uploading a file that can serve as a reverse shell or as a web shell to that particular web server, you can actually leverage endpoint security for that, right? So when you deploy an EDR can monitor a process. So that process will be your web server or Java or Tomcat, whatever it is, right? And you can see what type of files it is writing. So if you see that Java process is writing a file and starting an unusual command from what you've baselined, then you can fire an incident. So there are different controls that you actually can implement. I actually do talk about that particular scenario in the third workshop, which will be 2 weeks from now. But I will definitely cover that. It's actually also in one of my LinkedIn posts as well.
Thank you.
Great. Any further questions?
What is simple terms?
Taxi and MISP. So basically, in the, let's say, easiest way to explain it is a way that data for threat intelligence is structured, right? So when you do receive threat intelligence feeds from third parties, you receive them in a specific format, which is either sticks or taxi. MISP is one of the platforms that is basically an open source platform that can share threat intelligence data, right? So basically there is an operator that will say, if you see this IP, this is a malicious IP, they will record the TTPs, what is the threat actor, add a description and publish it. And then the solutions or your, let's say, industry or anybody else can actually connect, get that data and import it into their security solution as a malicious indicator.
So it's like a connector that you can onboard into Sentinel.
It's our first party connector, right? It's a taxi feed or a sticks feed that you can ingest. And you can connect to, for example, a sectorial SOC or a community-based indicator. So for example, allow Tor nodes and use it within your environment to hunt for if a user is using Tor in your environment, or if Tor is if somebody using Tor network is accessing your company resources, right? As an example. Does it make sense?
Yeah, essentially it's like a standard.
It's like a standard, yeah. More questions here? Is this boring for everybody or? All right. I promise next two will be very interesting. All righty. What we don't want to collect. So again, sorry, sir, that I have to point at you, but we are not interested in this type of data. So this data presents a cost to the security team. It's none of security's business to actually look into this type of data, right? So we don't have to, for example, look at full traffic logs and information level from your web servers. We want to keep block requests or basically warning requests that trigger specific patterns, but they're not blocked. We are not interested in debug logs like your hypervisor health, your container restarts, how you query the database. This is something basically what we don't want to see. Three main reasons, as I mentioned. First is cost. If you don't worry about the cost, then you have signal to noise. You're going to give a lot of data, but it's just noise for you. And finally, it's scope creep. You'll end up using a security tool that is supposed to help you as purely a log collector for your IT operations. Sure.
So for the things that we don't need to collect, is it like a tick kind of thing? Like practically, how do you do this? Like check and uncheck? Is it kind of that?
So for native content or first-party content within Azure, it's a matter of a couple of clicks, right? And we can actually show that very shortly. I'll open a storage account and we will see basically what I want to log, what I don't want to log. It's very simple to go through the checkboxes. But when it comes to data coming from, let's say, firewalls, it boils down to you how you configure the firewalls and what data they're sending. right? So every particular device has its own configuration that is sending data there. Does it make sense? All right. So 3 general questions you need to ask yourself. If anywhere there is a no, then that log doesn't need to be in your environment. So can this log help you detect an attack? Failed sign-ins, role grants, malware verdicts? Yes. CPU usage? Exactly. Again, can this log help us investigate an alert, right? So this is more on hunting or forensics or whatever it is. Process creation? Yes. DNS queries? Yes. File access? Yes. Latency of your web app? No. And again, can this help you improve what happened? Again, forensics and compliance, audit trails, admin actions, data access? Yes. Health probe of a load balancer? No. So this is a very simple three simple questions you need to ask yourself. And if anywhere is no, it has nothing to do with your security data. Make sense? Questions?
Peter, I have a question.
Sure.
So like the data sources you mentioned, whose role is it to onboard these data sources? Do you like the security analyst or SOC team works with like data engineers to do it? Is it that simple that they can do it themselves? They like I just want to imagine who are the parties involved when you set Sentinel up.
So this actually is not a part of like a Sentinel setup, right? It's more of a priorities for your security operations, right? So when you deal with security operations, you have a certain detection strategy, right? And your detection strategy drives what kind of log sources you will onboard and what data will come in. Does it make sense? So
like the process of actually onboarding that data source, is it as simple to just that a security professional can just go to Sentinel and do it? Or you need to involve like some infra and data engineers and so on?
I will talk about it in 3 slides from now. And it depends on what that data source is. So for example, if it's something native within Azure and you can send data to log analytics, it's fairly simple to onboard it. If it's a third-party SaaS application that exposes their logs using a RESTful API, it's very easy to collect the data. But if that data resides on a server in a binary format, then technically you cannot onboard it, right? So you need a way to extract the data, put it in a text file, somehow ship it to the actual ingestion pipeline. So the answer is it depends on what type of data you're generating, what type of connectivity that particular system can provide you to ship the data into the platform. I will literally cover that in a couple of slides from now. Sure, we have about 10 minutes of content, and then any more questions? I heard a yes somewhere. All right.
Can we onboard the logs or archive logs from the cross-platform like Curator or Splunk?
So if your third-party platform allows you to get large amount of data and export, and then yes, you can. So actually, in my previous job, I've done particularly that, migrating from one platform to another, that particular historical data. So it's very possible, but you need to be very, very careful on how you do that.
This will again cost you, right? So instead of that, you can just monitor the logs.
So again, these are historical logs. So ideally, from your previous integration, you would store it actually in a data lake because you will no longer use it actively, right? So that particular data will go to the lower cost tier, and you don't have to worry about that particular item. And then you will take care of your particular retention, right? So if you have a legal requirement, instead of you licensing your old solution or the solution you used to use before the migration, you just migrate the data and just keep using the lake storage for storing that particular data set.
Just like 120 days, right? Local compliance.
So you have the NCSA compliance, which is 120 days, but you might have some other legal requirements, right? So as I said, banks have a mandate of 10 years for specific type of data. Certain other, like telecom has their own, and many others have their own requirements. And you might have sometimes contractual requirements, right? So not just legal from the country or the regulator. You might have between two parties, like if you're an MSSP, you might have a specific contract on holding the data for X amount of years, right? So it all depends on whether it is regulatory or a legal requirement. Right. Okay.
What if we're using hybrid clouds? I guess like every cloud has its own way for logging and auditing, right? So how can we like?
All right. Excellent question. So Sentinel has native connectors to basically connect to your third-party cloud, right? So if you have, for example, GCP, we can ingest GCP data using native APIs, and it will go into its dedicated table. So whether you're cross-platform, whether you are using hybrid cloud, you're using on-premises, all of this data can come to a single repository. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I don't see GCP. The one you see.
Google Cloud. So if you're using GCP, Google Cloud, or AWS or Amazon, you can ingest the native data into Sentinel directly. What do you mean you?
Data.
Correct. So we do have a way of collecting on-premises data using Azure Arc, correct. So Arc is not the actual shipping method. Arc is an enablement method to basically forward the data, right? The agent is actually Azure Monitor agent that is deployed through Arc. All right. Questions? But so 90 days is the default one that comes for the analytical tier. Anything after that, by default, will go to the archive tier or the analytical. Yes. You just need to configure the table for archiving. Correct.
To add like any storage account or something.
No. We can cover that scenario actually on our next session, so it makes more sense. All right. So I did classify log sources for a SOC point of view, how much logs they generate, so the volume of logs, what's the value of that log source for threat detection and for threat hunting. This is something that will help you determine how to store logs, how to process logs, and where they go as well. So for example, you will find DNS logs. They have a very high volume. So imagine every single website that you visit, you need to resolve the domain name into a IP address. So your DNS query data will be high in volume. From a threat detection point of view, is medium. For threat hunting is low, which means that this data can effectively go to a lake tier because it's a high volume. For threat detection, it's a medium value. For threat hunting, it's a low value. Therefore, you can put it in a cheaper tier as well. Make sense? Great. My favorite part. So we will talk about how does Sentinel and Microsoft ecosystem help you meet requirements within the Qatar cybersecurity framework. So how many of you are aware of this particular requirement and this framework? Show of hands. Excellent. So as an entity, you probably have received this document and looked through its entire basis. We will talk particularly chapter 8, which addresses the security monitoring requirements. Within there, for example, you have 47 mandatory use cases that every organization needs to have. If you utilize Microsoft E5, now E7, and the Sentinel, you're basically having full coverage of all the relevant use cases. Right? So out of the box, your environment will cover all of the relevant use cases. And it comes in the form of anomaly rules, user behavior. We have the fusion engine for multi-stage attacks and incidents, right? We have machine learning-based detection. We do threat intelligence matching. And we have a lot of third-party content from the Content Hub that will basically give you that particular analytic that's needed. Now, this will be from the detection coverage. Now, for custom detections, there are only 3 use cases where you have to actually manually build the detection. And it's not because it's a platform capability issue, it is because you need to onboard that data yourself. And these are primarily your firewalls, right? So one of the use cases is clearly stating that you need to understand the relations between the source IP address, the address that's translated, and how it impacts another system. So this might come from your web application firewalls in the form of XFF. I don't know if you know that field. Correct. It's X forwarded for. So this is being used when you have a public-facing application protected by a WAF. So what is happening is when the WAF inspects that particular traffic, it changes the source IP. So your web server will see basically the IP address of the WAF appliance, not the client that originated the connection. So an XFF header basically tells you it's inserted by the WAF, and it tells you who is the actual source of that particular traffic. So it will give you the IP address of the originating client, right? So this type of use cases particularly are coming from out-of-the-box content, but it's specific to your appliance. But so what do you mean? Correct. So particularly, those detections are already built in, but you need to enable the relevant content, right? But when we talk about E5, why do we talk E5 for coverage? Because a lot of these use cases are talking about data, right? So when a user accesses sensitive data. So this is not a Sentinel detection. If you have a third-party solution, you need to build it. But if you use, for example, Purview, which is our solution for data loss protection, right? That will trigger an event, or inside the risk management will trigger an event that is related when an individual is accessing sensitive files, right? So there are many use cases where you have an individual requesting access to sensitive files that are there within the framework itself. Hopefully this answers a little bit. There is another use case, for example, machine that has an active malware incident establishing network connections, right? So it's fairly easy once you have Defender for endpoint on that machine. You can actually identify the incident when they have a malware detected, and therefore you can run a simple playbook to grab all the network connections from the moment we detected the malware infection, and it will give you the network connections that are made by that endpoint. So there are a lot of use cases there, as I said, 47. I've studied them in depth from 2021 up until even today. And we can safely say that once you deploy the platform and you onboard the relevant data sources and you work with E5, your coverage is 100% against the actual 47 use cases.
It's like a license, the type of license that you can procure from Microsoft, which explain like it includes Office, Power BI Pro licenses, and also like security licenses.
So if I don't have the license, I don't get all this, right?
So there are things that you will not get, right? So for example, let's say you want to monitor privilege escalation, right? But on an endpoint. Privilege escalation means that I'm a low-level user, and using an exploit technique or abusing a service, I became on a higher level, right? Like a local admin on a workstation. So if you don't have tools to detect this particular signal, you need to write the logic, right? If you have tools that can detect this and report this, then you don't need to write that particular logic yourself. Does it make sense?
Yes, but I was thinking about this like only the level of the infrastructure. I wasn't thinking about like applications and stuff.
So a lot of the use cases that are actually in the framework are more on the application side versus the infrastructure side, right? So you have, I mean, we can talk about it more on the next session, definitely, but there are at least 25 rules here that are primarily on application layer, such as data, right? So it is important to basically understand the framework and how our tool is positioned basically against the framework. Sorry.
Is anyone CSA and the framework? They're the National Cybersecurity Agency. They're in charge of making sure all the entities in Qatar are compliant with like standards that the government puts. So this is what they're referring to. So if you're someone that's into cybersecurity, familiarize yourself with the NCSA framework and how.
Yeah, so I have a question, like you mentioned, like, let's say you detect a malware. How would you know it's a false positive?
So technically, you don't know it's a false positive until you start investigating, right? So you will receive an incident that something has happened somewhere. So let's say it's a malware, right? Or it can be false positive, it can be false negative, true positive, true negative, right? So it has different states. And you need to perform an investigation to understand if this is a true positive or true negative, false positive, false negative. On one of the sessions that we are planning for 3 weeks from now, we will actually talk about how you can leverage AI to help you determine if that particular event is malicious or not. So a lot of the activities for a SOC analyst are being automated, whether they're coming from the orchestration playbooks or they're coming by using security copilots or generative AI that is specialized in cybersecurity. Hopefully this answers your question. All right. Any further questions?
We've got 20 minutes, so if you want to move to the demos, or do we have it?
We have more slides. We have more, and I'll just talk about how data gets in, and then we can, maybe if you want to see the tool live, I can actually demonstrate and show you that as well. So as I said, we have native service connectors and native data connectors that basically anything within the Azure or Microsoft ecosystem will send data natively. We have the codeless connector. As I said, if you have an API that will provide you the data, you can write a codeless connector, or your vendor can write a codeless connector, and you will get the data in. Such examples are CrowdStrike, Okta, and many others. You can use the Azure Monitor agent, as we talked about. You need to deploy Azure Arc for your on-premises server or third-party cloud servers. Based on that, you will have the capability of running a DCR, which is a data collection move, right? And you can specify, I want to select Windows events, specific custom logs, and so on. Finally, we have two other methods. One is syslog and SCEF. So CEF is common event format for all security appliances, right? So they follow a specific standard how to send data. Finally, you can ingest data via log ingestion API or using Logstash itself. So you have multiple ways of getting the data, whether it is custom or something that is already existing as a third party or first party plugin. Make sense? Excellent. So let's walk a little bit into a practical demo. So what would you like to see first? All right, let's see if I can share.
security assessment for them.
So you can actually see first what we're stating here, supported by Microsoft, right? Which means that you will identify that this is a trusted and coming from Microsoft. Second, all of the solutions that are actually listed are in a GitHub repo of Sentinel, right? I got it right? Correct. So you see here, there's a structure. And there are a lot of content available. So data connectors, dashboards, ASIM, which is our model, our unified security model, hunting queries, notebooks, parsers. So everything you actually deploy in a single security solution. And there is a process, right? So you can actually fork the repo, contribute to it. It's being checked by developers as well. Hopefully it makes sense.
If I have a use case, my first step would be to go to the
Content Hub.
Content Hub and check if it's there, and most likely it is there because we have like near.
Correct. If it's not there, you need to ask yourself what it is that you're trying to do. Is it data? So if it's data and you can actually write a codeless connector, it's basically straightforward. So you just need to define the RESTful API endpoint of your provider, find your authentication key, and have a data. And codeless connector will read it as metric. All right. So again, let's look into the workbooks, so the graphical representation work. And you can actually see a lot of different connectors here. And some of it's custom, actually built by me for some testing purposes, or you can actually use predefined templates that actually contain that particular work. So if you see like Azure Activity, it tells you what this content pack is about. I'll give you an example of one of my contents. I'm gonna open up. Here, you see workbook, it's the Zoom itself. And here, basically, I'm analyzing latency of events being ingested into Sentinel, because this a little bit matters from the detection point of view. So I can see how many events I'm getting per day, what kind of events I'm getting from which data source. So Microsoft Graph activity, service principal sign-ins, interactive user sign-in, audit logs, and many other data, right? So the graphical representation of security data is there, and you're able to sit with a simple case.
And just like a side comment, for those of you who are familiar with Power BI, like you have the workbooks, which is a graphical representation of the data that underneath is like just like a log analytics workspace, right? So like there are some use cases where let's say you have an executive, right? The executive is not going to go to like Sentinel to see the data. You could actually take that data and then ingest it into Power BI as well, because it's just KQL query underneath.
So basically, when you take a look at your log analytic workspace, you have an option to basically export that particular data as a Fatima. So once you write your query, so I have like a lot of queries here. But here's an example. I was going through the flow analysis of data, right? Flow logs. And you will see you'll see basically the result, right? So let me go back to KQL mode.
I love KQL. I fell in love with it last year when I learned about it. Such an intuitive language. It's proprietary by Microsoft, right?
It's a proprietary language. I'm just trying to find the export button. It's not visible for some reason. No, it should be.
And there's a button.
It's under save and save as a query. No. There was a part here. Yeah. I just need to reload. But there is a way that basically this query that's executed, right?
Basically save it as a Power Query that you can then just copy.
Right, it's here. So if I run it now, there's a share button here, and you can run it as an query.
Or like it gives you the semantic model. You can just easily ingest. to Power BI.
Like this in that.
Or even like an event house for those of you who are familiar with Fabric. Just a note for any data.
Actually, there is now a native connector directly to Lake.
Yeah.
One Lake, correct. Yeah.
That's really exciting.
All right.
I think we have a couple of minutes only left.
Any questions? Or do you want me to show maybe something?
Could you maybe walk us over a scenario? Oh, was there a question? Like a scenario, يعني, like imagine you are a SOC analyst. Like how would you start? Where would you go? How would you start your day?
So basically, depends on which level you are in the SOC. So level 1, level 2, or level 3. So level 1 are basically analysts that are looking into your incidents, right, and alerts. So most of the time you will spend looking and analyzing alerts that are within your tenant here. I might not have any alerts here, so I do apologize for that. Oh, I do. Excellent.
I have to come here to see the alerts. I cannot just get it on my Teams or my email.
You can with a Logic app, right? So we have automation playbooks that already made content for this type of activity, right? But usually security analysts will be looking into the dashboard itself, right? So here I've created a couple of things that are related to the Qatar 2022 framework, primarily detecting privileged users being created or modified within your environment, right? What we're trying to say here is that you will see a sample user has been created and added to a privileged role, right? So I will look into that particular alert and I will have specific signals here, right? Such as timeline, the query results, and many other things here, and the mapping. So I can actually see that this is a sample user as an entity, which means this user is detected to be created by that particular user, which is admin. It will tell you what's happening with this particular entity, right? There might not be a lot of events here, simply because this is a simple detection, but you can actually see the results of the query that was executed. It will tell you when it was created, how much time it took for the user to elevate access, right? So from the moment we created that particular privilege escalation or assigned that privilege role to the user, how long it took the user to gain access and activate the new role. So this is usually an indicator that it's something malicious, because I haven't seen a human that from the moment a role is allocated to them by the admin team, that they activate the role in a minute or two even. And this is done in less than a second.
You know, what's the difference between incidents and alerts? Is it like multiple alerts?
Correct. So alerts are basically triggers of specific malicious activity or suspected malicious activity. Okay. But incidents is a group of alerts, and there is a mechanism on how we group alerts, right? So multiple alerts are grouped based on entities of that particular incident, and correct, entities and similarities. So I will just briefly talk about that, if I may. So when you define a particular rule in your environment, right? We will create a schedule query rule, or we can actually go into pre-made ones. Let's see, custom detection. Here, so I have newly created user and assigned to privileged role. So when I take a look at that particular rule, I will have that's correct. So this is the relevant query. This is what we are talking about, KQL query, right? We do have the detection rule, how long it runs, the frequency is custom. I'm going to run every 15 minutes. I do the mapping based on MITRE, how I categorize this particular event, what is happening. And here you see entity mappings. So you extract the user from your particular query result. So I will say the UPN of the user is new user principal name. So this is the new user that was created by that particular administrator. So this becomes an entity. Then you have the second entity, which is an IP address. So from where did the event originate? So then you will create, yes, the event originated from the creation IP address. So these become entities in Sentinel or in XDR. Now, what happens is when you have another incident that involves this particular user or an activity that's suspicious and within a specific parameter time frame, this will be grouped into a single incident. So you have multiple alerts, but instead of your analyst focusing on diving through so many alerts to identify what is what, there is an incident that will tell the analyst, here are these alerts that are grouped into a single incident, what we believe is a malicious causality. And
So you wouldn't want to look at the overall picture that drilled down.
correct. So you can look into incidents, definitely, or alerts. So this is part of the triaging process of an alert or an incident, right?
Do someone has a time for
me? Thank you.
So we take that as our cue. So we did promise people that we're going to ask them questions and we're going to give out these feedbacks. Fatah, I see a whole bag. Like we've upgraded, so we have more budget now. Oh, okay. Yeah. So Peter, 3 questions, please. Please don't answer until you raise